Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. We've got a special lady on this episode, Hannah Wilson. Thanks for joining us. What a crazy career you've had and an unbelievable following actually on social media, haven't you? I mean, you're clearly getting attention from a lot of people. I mean, like, can we just start off with you and your journey and kind of like what's kind of got you to this point?
Well, morning, TJ. Thank you for having me here. What's got me to this point? So, I was a teacher for 19 years. I kind of fell into being an English teacher. I did a post-colonial literature degree, and I thought I'd go into publishing or writing, but I ended up becoming a teacher and just loved it. And I taught in schools in Kent and London predominantly. When I was moving up the leadership ladder, it was getting more and more female, so more and more male heavy. And that's why I then co-founded Women Ed 5 years ago, because I was a ambitious female leader looking for visible role models in the system. And that's what I just joined Twitter actually. So like Women Ed and my Twitter experience kind of was one and the same. And that's why I've got quite a big network, because I helped to grow that really big grassroots organisation, and then supported the launch of like BAME Ed, BT Ed, and then we started Diverse Ed. A lot of my connectivity is actually through Twitter, but also LinkedIn. And I'm really interested in using LinkedIn, as we met, like through the kind of the non-teaching connections, the kind of the professional and specialism connections. So people know me for a couple of different reasons. Like for some of the grassroots stuff, I was quite a visible head teacher because I did all my recruitment for my startup school via social media and saved the school lots of money. And I'm quite a candid person. I think people quite like people who are quite candid on social media. I try to keep it constructive and positive, but I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I'm quite prepared to voice what I think about things. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Me too, though. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. In some respects, I try to remain positive on social media, but there's some things I wear my heart on my sleeve, and there's some things that just wind me up. In particular, like
Mm.
the things that have happened in terms of the decisions made by the people in power this year. So, I mean, I get it. I mean, there's frustrations. I mean, you can't be perfect all the time, but ultimately, I think like sometimes I feel like we're kind of saying things that people feel but are too scared to say them. And I go on.
Well, I was going to say there's two things to that. Like, firstly, I think I've shown quite a lot of vulnerability on social media, which actually gets the most traction. It always makes me laugh. Which tweets get the most relikes, like likes and retweets? And like one of my most liked tweets in the last 6 months was my distaste for aubergine. And like one Friday night, I was looking at my fridge and I had like five aubergines in my fridge because I do HelloFresh, and I wasn't feeling particularly inspired. And I tweeted out like, "Please, I've been a veggie for like 30 years. Can someone please tell me why I should like aubergine?" And it was just a bit of a random Friday night chat, but I got like 80 recipes sent to me. So I think that, like, I think being human helps, but being vulnerable. Like when I'm not sure you know that. I think it was 3 years ago now. I had a bit of a fallout with the Daily Mail around diversity at our school, and I ended up it went quite viral for about a week. And I then blogged about what it was like to be like in the eye of the storm, and what it was like to be sort of like dragged through Facebook and to receive hate mail. And I think me just showing that vulnerability. And then when I then left my headship, I got put on gardening leave. I spoke about that at an event, and people were like, "No one talks about this." I was like, "That's the problem, isn't it? There's
Mhm.
so many taboos and stigmas and things we sweep under the carpet. That's not how I was brought up." And I am aware that I've got a bit of a privilege for the fact that I've now left the system and I work independently, and I haven't got a boss anymore, and I
Mm.
haven't signed a social media contract, so I can say what I want within reason. Interesting journey around like finding and using my voice in that social edu media kind of space.
Yeah, it is mad. I mean, I still haven't worked out social media. I mean, like sometimes I think I put a post out and it should get likes, and then like I post out something that I think, oh, I ain't gonna get anything, and then it's the one it's my best hitter, so I don't really get it either. But ultimately, I think yeah, I mean, it's remarkable what you've done, and I think you're quite remarkable in respect to what you're doing, because you're right. I think there's a lot of head teachers that are in the system or teachers or whatever that feel like they can't express what they feel. And I mean, I had a lady on my podcast actually. She's a teacher, 4 years into it, and she always felt like she couldn't speak. And then the first time she felt like she could speak was on my podcast about kind of the things that she was going through. And it's
Mm,
and actually she messaged me the other day saying thanks for helping me find my voice, because she like
mm.
it's a shame, like 4 years into the teaching career, she never felt like she had a voice.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I'm also really mindful, TJ, of the fact that I left the system. I left the security of a salaried role, but I've also left the stress of being a head. And like
Mm.
I've got a lot of friends who are head teachers and deputy heads, and they've obviously had a very difficult year. So I'm quite careful about the things I do comment on because I don't want the judgment or the critique, but I'm
Mm.
also aware that it's not directly affecting me anymore, and there's issues that I will completely champion and debates I will engage in, but I want to make sure the voices we're hearing are actually the voices of the people doing the job, because there's quite a lot of noise on social media, Twitter more so, and a
Yeah.
lot of the noise is coming from people who actually aren't doing the role anymore. And I think we've got to be really careful about whose voices we're listening to as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in some respects, it's kind of like why I started this platform is to give teachers a voice and actually be able to express how they feel. Because I feel like what we only ever hear as the public is what we hear on the media or what we hear from politicians, and it's not always a true. Actually, it's never a true representation of actually what goes on in the profession and what actually goes in schools. And I mean, I've spoken to head teachers that can't say certain things because they don't want to like upset governors or their trust, or I mean, what do you think the biggest issue is?
With that ability to be honest,
Yeah,
do you mean?
yeah, sorry, yeah.
Um, I think there's a real fear of candor. So I mean, I worked at One Trust for 10 years, and when I started there wasn't a social media contract because social media wasn't really that big. Like there
Mm.
was Facebook issues, but like Twitter wasn't really a thing back then, or LinkedIn for educators. And I was growing my network as it then came in, but then they slapped us with a social media contract about what we could and couldn't do. But then I got asked to run training for all the heads across those 42 schools to actually get them on social media. So I think sometimes there's the fear of should we, shouldn't we, how do we? And I've always, like when I then became a deputy head, I used social media to help our school turn itself around. Like we were an inadequate school when I got there. We didn't have any budget because we were in deficit budget, and we needed CPD and we needed to be outward facing. And I used Twitter as a way to bring expertise and to share best practice within the school but beyond the school, so that was quite interesting. And then when I got my headship, like they recruited me through social media, and I was really candid at interview that I blog, I tweet, I speak at events. That's who I am. And if they wanted the authentic me, then that needs to be part of the role. And if I wasn't allowed to do that, I didn't want the job. And I was like really honest at interview because I think
Mm.
you need to know what kind of culture you're working in.
Absolutely.
And it was all good when I got the job, and I recruited like loads of people and saved loads of money. But then it became problematic because perhaps I was too honest and too direct. And I mean, there are things that go wrong in schools, and there are things that go wrong in the system, and I think we need to talk about them. And I was always professional. I was never critical of my employer, but I ruffled a few feathers in my candor. And I also think that when you do have a profile, and I'm very I'm what's the word I'm looking for? Like I'm really proud of my profile. I've got an amazing network, but
Mm.
I've worked really hard to meet those people and to maintain those relationships. I didn't do the social media networking to then recruit 100 staff for free, which is what I did. Like I didn't pay for a single advert in 2 schools because
That's
I recruited
that's
it all
mental.
through my network. But I invested the time and the energy and the resource to get to that point where I could do that recruitment.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it's a bit of a tightrope, a bit of a double-edged sword, that people want you because you've got profile, but then they don't like you because you've got profile.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of egos. And I try really hard to be like maintain that level of humility and modesty. I cringe sometimes when I get tagged into things because like you don't want to be blowing your own trumpet. But I also run sessions to help women and people of colour self promote and become more visible. So I think it's that constant balance, that very, very sort of like difficult line we walk about how much we share, how honest we need to be. But it's also about finding those safe spaces as well, I think. I do see people oversharing sometimes on social media. And there's stuff that I think is like Facebook, or stuff that I think is like a WhatsApp to my best mate or my sister, that I wouldn't tweet about some of those things. So it's interesting where people's boundaries are as well.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just obviously, when you're in that kind of headship role, I mean, obviously, you've got kind of people that are saying that that they give you the freedom to do certain things, but then at the same time, you're quite restricted in the way that you can do certain things. Like, do you feel that there is this level of having to compromise your kind of morals to tick the box?
I never compromised my morals or my values. I challenged things a lot, but it's interesting sometimes about how someone intends something and how something is interpreted. So during, I had a very outward facing team. We didn't expect everyone to tweet and blog and be at events, but that was who I recruited, and it was part of our visibility as a school. We shared a lot of best practice, but sometimes I would send a message to one of my team and say, just reread that tweet. Or did you mean that in that blog? I wasn't trying to censor them. I wasn't trying to edit them. It was more like critical friendship. Like, I don't think that's what you meant. And I think that's going to be received wrong. And I think it's so hard on Twitter in particular with the limited characters that I quite often write a tweet, rewrite the tweet, and then delete the tweet and don't send it because I don't want it to be taken out of context. And
Yeah.
I think I've almost moved more to long form than short form now. And I write a lot of blogs because actually in a blog you can give more context and more specifics and more of a perspective, and you can build an argument, whereas in a tweet, and I like, even if you're doing a thread, there's people subtweeting like one little snapshot and taken out of context, that's when you can get into hot
Yeah.
water. So I think it's that. I think quite a few people are quite naive on social media about the fact that once it's there you can't take it back, and it might come back and haunt you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, let's talk about the kind of work you're doing. I mean, BAME Ed, Women Ed, and Diverse Ed. I mean, like, what kind of pushed you to go down this route?
So, just to be clear, BAMED's a whole separate organisation, but we work with them and we support them. So, Women Ed was about the fact that female heavy profession, lack of visible role models. We wanted to build a support network, mentoring, coaching, and pass it on. And I'm really proud. Like, I've pulled back, but I'm really proud of everything we've achieved. We published the first book, now the second book's just out, and it's like it's global. Like, that's really really exciting. Then BAMED got launched, and it was kind of like as part of the women-led movement, but thinking about other representations and who was missing from some of the conversations. And then LGBT Ed started, and we actually hosted their launch at our school when we first launched Diverse Ed. And the whole reason why Benny and I, my old deputy head, started Diverse Ed was about intersectionality, and about the fact that some people have got to choose which of their labels they wear when they go to an event. So if you are a bisexual woman or a disabled black person, you need to decide, okay, this weekend, am I going to go to BAME Ed or am I going to go to Disability Ed? Am I going to go to LGBT Ed? Am I going to go to Women Ed? And like, it kind of like simplifies our identity when we have multiple layers to our identity. So Benny and I just talked about the fact that she felt quite split in her own identity, having to choose where to go. And could we have one event where we brought our very diverse networks together? So, and because we had a startup school, it was a beautiful building and a lot of space. We had the capacity to do that. So we just basically put out we were going to have this event, and it was 4 years ago this Saturday. So we just had, and we picked January as a kind of like every year we're going to have a January event to like frame the calendar year rather than the academic year, and we ran that for 3 years and built quite a lot of traction. And then when I left working in the system, a lot of people said to me, "Are you going to have a diverse educators website?" I wasn't sure at that point because I didn't want to saturate the market. And back in the spring when I started working independently, I was trying to sort out my own income, my own employment in the middle of a pandemic. Like, it wasn't the best timing, perhaps, to resign from my job. I didn't know that when I resigned. But then with everything that happened in the summer last year, triggered by George Floyd's murder, and then the kind of the amplification of the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion in society, but in education at large, we had a conversation and we reached out to some of the organisations we've worked with and said, like, we think we need to do the website now. If we don't do the website this academic year and we do it in a year's time, we've almost going to have missed the opportunity to really foreground and showcase who's doing amazing work out there. So I basically spent all summer working with my branding person and my web person to curate and create the website to launch on September the 1st as a resource for schools. And like, I've got the time and capacity to do that. Like, going back to voice, TJ, like, I'm very aware that not being ahead, I can blog, I can
Yeah,
do podcasts. I've got a bit more time and energy than I used to have.
yeah,
And sometimes the people we want to hear from are the people who are the busiest and haven't got the time to do it. So that's how I position myself with the Diverse Educators website, if I was not on Twitter, if I was not well connected, if I didn't know where to start with diversity, equity, inclusion as a school leader, how would I source information? Where would I go? How would I validate it? So basically, I went out to my network, and that then spawned other people's connections. So that's the idea of the website. It's a resource, it's a directory, it's a one-stop shop. You go there, and it takes you out to all of the other organisations. So that's my why for the website, and my bigger why is the fact that like we have got some serious issues in society and education to sort out. We're not representative. We've got people who are marginalised. We've got voices who aren't being listened to. We're not reflecting our communities and our student bodies in our staff bodies in our
Mhm.
governance. And we've been talking about this for like 5 years, and it shouldn't take the murder of a black man in America for everyone to pay attention, but it has. And I
Yeah.
think just the timing of that happening during lockdown, where everyone was at home, everyone was on social media, everyone was watching the TV, like no one could ignore the fact that that happened, and no
Yeah.
one could remain ignorant to the need for significant social justice and social change. So I think that's been a massive milestone in the conversations I've been involved in. That I feel like it's harnessed quite a lot of energy and quite a lot of agency. That we've got more commitment, more intention than perhaps we've had previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the work you're doing is wonderful because we only have to look at the kind of the report that came out from the Institute of Education maybe a month or two ago, and they kind of look at the lack of diversity within schools. And I think it's so important because when you're an ethnic minority, when you or a woman, but when you're looking at a staff body in your school and you don't see that representation, like you can't relate to somebody or you don't see yourself in somebody, like it kind of puts barriers up in like subconsciously in front of you, doesn't it? Because you don't
Mm.
have necessarily anyone to aspire to. And I'm not saying that you can't aspire to different people, but you want to know that you can achieve it, and they've come from similar places that you've come from, right? I mean, what do you think that needs to kind of change in schools to make that more reality? More reality.
So that's an interesting question as well, because I think layer one or phase one of schools DEI or EDI work is around visible representation, and I think a lot of schools are really focusing on race at the moment, and I think that's right in many ways, and gender has been a focus for a long time before that, but I think it then opens the consciousness and the awareness of the other protected characteristics that are less visible, and sexual orientation and disability per se, where actually there's a lot of things going on that people don't see and they don't appreciate if they're not talked about.
Mm.
So for me, it's a journey that schools need to walk on, really thinking about like the young people they are co-creating and shaping, and the adults, the citizens, like the global citizens we're going to create in the future. And I think there's layers upon layers of things we need to sort out. And I think like staffing is one of them, curriculum's another one, policies is another one, practice. So like you could go on list per list per list of all the things we need to do,
Mm.
but they all come under culture and ethos. They all come under the vision, mission, and value set of the school, and really of the school system. Like, what is the purpose of education? What is the purpose of school? To create agents of change, to create people who are going to go and be the best versions of themselves in society. And I think, as you said, I mean, when you can't see yourself in the staff, when you can't see yourself in the curriculum, when you can't see yourself in assemblies, what is that internal message that you are then telling yourself about your value and your sense of
Yeah.
belonging, not only in your school but in your community and in the world at large? So I think that's the journey that lots of people are walking at the moment. And I just want to also to speak to the fact that like I'm a straight white able-bodied woman. I'm really aware that that jars some people that I care about this and I do this work and I get paid to do this work. It's problematic in some ways because some people would think that like to lead some of this work you need to have that protected characteristic. How I come at it is I come at it from a holistic point of view. So as a head we created a holistic school vision and a holistic school value set, thinking about all of the intersects of an individual's identity. And I now work at Higher Education 2 days a week, and I do associate work for them, and that's all about this pledge to the delivery of a whole education so that young people can thrive in life learning and work. So for me, it's the thinking about the kind of the universal entitlement. And I think perhaps like, I have a lot of conversations with friends with protected characteristics about the difference in their experience of doing this work and mine. And I think I know where I can add value, but I also know where I'm not the best person to contribute to the conversation. But I signpost out, and I'm helping to amplify people from my network who are doing amazing work, but they haven't got the profile that I've got. So I'm trying to help people actually raise their profile and be seen and be heard. And that's something I take, like, that's as part of my responsibility, that I'm sharing my platform, I'm sharing my network with other people who are adding significant value to the education system.
Yeah, I think you're doing amazing work. I think if people are looking at it in that way in some respects and not kind of completely understand the view you're coming from, I think they're probably taking it in the wrong context, because I think in some respects we need somebody like you that maybe isn't from like maybe an ethnic minority, or like like basically the kind of things that you're passionate about. We kind of need somebody that kind of understands and actually supports it, because if we're kind of literally it's us against you, like you, I mean, in some respects, it's never going to work, is it? So we need to collaborate and actually come together and make it work and support each other. So I think you're doing the right thing.
Thank you. And I think, I mean, what I try to model is that we need to listen more and we need to
Absolutely.
learn more. And I've had the privilege of listening a lot in the last 5 years and learning a lot. And I've listened to people share their stories. And you know, so I was very involved in the Department of Education's Equality and Diversity grants. I hosted some women's leadership programs, some diverse leadership programs. I've sat in rooms with 90 people of colour who are school teachers and school leaders, sharing harrowing lived experience of what it's like to be a black or brown teacher or leader in the school system. And for me, it's how we amplify those stories, because for the people who deny it, for the people who challenge it and say we haven't got systemic racism in our school system, they're not listening to the right people, and they're not really open to learning a different person's perspective and experience.
Mm.
So I definitely position myself as an inclusive ally to lots of different groups. I mean, I'm learning lots at the moment about disability awareness. I'm trying to really upskill my own knowledge and understanding on trans awareness. So, I mean, I think, like, we all need to be aware of our own blind spots and aware of our own gaps and our own knowledge and understanding. And we need to take responsibility to go out there and do the reading and the listening to actually understand more. And then I help by then championing that and sort of like addressing all of the isms and the prejudices. So next week, I'm involved in a webinar for Leeds Beckett University, and it's inclusive allyship, and it's 4 or 5 of us from different backgrounds talking about how we step up and speak out and stand out, I guess, as inclusive allies, and how we need other people to actually get involved in that active allyship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think you raised a quite a good point, because I think people do have blind spots, don't they? I mean, it's not like they consciously do it, but I think it is a bit of a subconscious decision, because you kind of like you kind of go to employ people that you get on with, or that you kind of like, or that you know that you're going to gel with, and it's not a conscious decision that I'm not going to go with a coloured person just because they're coloured. It's because you kind of maybe relate to somebody. But I think that kind of needs I kind of needs addressing. But I think on the flip side, though, is you can kind of argue, well, we shouldn't just give the position to a coloured person just because they're coloured. So, I mean, how do you get the right balance?
Yes, and that comes up a lot, like the whole meritocracy argument, and the best person needs to get the job. If I'm really honest, I only ever really hear that from straight white men, and I have to say, like, I agree to a certain extent, but I also want you to check your privilege. And I'm doing lots of work with governance at the moment. I'm also doing lots of work with ITTE, looking at sort of like the entry into the profession, but also the people who are doing the recruitment of head teachers, because how are we going to change the face of head teachers if we're not changing the face of governors?
Hmm.
But equally, how are we going to get more diverse people to step into the profession if we don't change the policies and practices and systems and processes that clearly aren't working? So I think that's an argument. So I think it's about redefining what good looks like, isn't it? Like what success looks like, what impact looks like, and looking for different things. So, I've always, not always, in the last 5 6 years, I've very much looked at things through a values led sort of like lens. And I think what you said about who you connect with, I think I try to connect with people whose values are similar to mine and whose passions and perspective are similar to mine. it doesn't matter where they're from, what they look like, how they talk, what school they went to. We've got a common shared passion, purpose, core values. And I think that's a way to perhaps diversify who you're connecting with. And then when we started recruiting for our startup schools, we designed a values-led recruitment process where we were looking for the right types of people as opposed to the right set of academics.
Mm.
Yes, it's important to be qualified and to have a certain level, like clearly like teacher qualification, safeguarding, etc. However, I think sometimes people get so bogged down with credentials and which school you've worked at and what accolade you've got, and they don't actually see the person
Yeah.
behind it. And I think similarly to my holistic approach to young people, I can remember on one of the talks for my MPQH several years ago now, someone talked about names, not numbers, in spreadsheets, and that really
Yeah.
resonated with me because I was working in a school in a trust where it like we didn't even talk about the kids' names in some of the curriculum meetings. It was literally like they were a percentage, they were a figure, they were a number for the results, and we were diminishing human beings into exam results. So I think for me, like it's valuing humanity, isn't it? It's valuing human beings and individuals and the value that different individuals bring to a school community, to the school system.
Yeah, I mean, can I just add to that? Because I mean, I don't want to be politically incorrect here, but I mean, I've been doing education recruitment for 7 years. Well, this is my seventh year. So I've had situations, and I'm just giving you an example, and I hope people don't take this in the wrong context. I'm speaking honestly, but I've had times where I've sent out a CV that is very similar to another CV, but because the name is like Peter Smith compared to maybe Olufemi, like they're more likely to be shortlisted. And again, like almost to the point where you almost have to take the names off, because you don't want schools to stereotype. I mean,
Mm.
how do we stop that happening in the workplace?
Well, you mentioned unconscious bias earlier on, and I think like there's arguments for and against unconscious bias training. There's lots of research that says it doesn't impact anything, doesn't have any help, but it does raise consciousness as part of a body of work. My ex-boyfriend had a Sierra Leonese last name, and he didn't get interviews. And when he changed it to his British last name, he got interviews, and it made him really angry. But you also hear the same with gender blindness, that like a husband and wife will swap names on CVs, and he'll get twice as many job offers as she does. So I think there's something there about removing details. If you remove names, gender, age, another big one, salary actually. So if you think about the gender pay gap and the BAME pay gap, if you remove the current salary from an application, then people are more likely to close the pay gap between gender and between race. So I think actually how we do recruitment, how we share information is probably something we really need to think about, and that might just even the playing field a little bit more. I'm not sure if you've heard the anecdote, TJ, about I think it was Chicago. There was an orchestra trying to diversify their musicians. They realised that they were getting more and more men in the orchestra, and they wanted to get the gender balance. So they looked at their processes, and they realised that there was unconscious bias on the panel. So they got all of the musicians to come on and perform behind a curtain. So then they got an upsurge in more women coming into the orchestra. But
Wow.
then they began to dip again, and they began to go back to having more men. Then they realised that the panel could hear whether it was a man's footstep or a woman's footstep. So they had to go behind a curtain, but also take their shoes off. And I just think like it's funny, but it's also sad. Like just anecdotally, that like our unconscious biases change, they evolve as well, and we might be aware of one and address that one, but then another one will come in. So I think there's a bigger piece of work to be done here about who and what we value, because I mean, we are a diverse country, and we have got inequities between lots of the different protected characteristic groups. And like class is another one, isn't it? It's not part of the Equalities Act. It's not one of the characteristics, but we know there's a massive class system in the UK. And if we think about the fallout and the who has lost the most during COVID and lockdown and the pandemic, it's particular families. And I'm sure you've seen everything on Twitter and LinkedIn this week about the £30 food
Yeah,
voucher, and
mental.
just the oh, just shocking what families are getting as their sustenance for a week. So I think we've got big social problems to actually
Yeah.
address
Absolutely.
in society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's remarkable. And the thing is, I completely get it. I mean, look, I was fortunate enough that I always progressed in my career, and my color didn't necessarily like come like wasn't necessarily a factor. But don't get me wrong, like when I was 21, I got a job in Canary Wharf for an estate agent called Chase Evans, and there was like four colored people in the whole company. You know, I mean, like you're talking about a company that had 50 plus employees, and there was like four colored people. I was like the only brown person there, or one of two
Mm,
brown people there. You know, and I think
mm.
two black people there. So I mean, it's mental. I mean, it's something that obviously we need to change, but I think it's very hard, isn't it? Because like when you don't completely understand someone and you don't completely connect with someone, you're not necessarily going to offer them a job if you don't 100% believe that they're going to be the right fit for your school. You know, so
Mm,
what what,
mm.
what do we do there?
Yeah, that comes up quite a lot about cultural fit. Your face doesn't fit, your values don't fit, but then nothing's going to change, is it, if we don't diversify those spaces? And I've also read lots of articles and blogs about the fact that like tokenistic recruitment for diversity is really problematic on many layers. But that person who is recruited, and because they're the right person, but also because they are going to bring a diverse perspective or lived experience, if they are the only person with that protected characteristic in that space, then that's quite an isolating thing to do.
Yeah,
Whereas if you recruit a group, like a couple of governors or a couple of teachers from a diverse perspective, they're more likely to stay because there's more of an inclusive culture. And I think it's interesting that since the summer, and I'm sure you've seen this in recruitment, there's been more proactive, more intentional diversity in attraction and recruitment because people have realised it. But if those schools and trusts haven't changed their culture and their policies, those diverse people won't stay for very long
yeah, absolutely.
because there won't be a culture of inclusion. They won't feel a sense of belonging. So I think there's for me, it's not just the getting diverse people onto our team. How are we going to keep them? And I just think the education system's really crap at exit interviews and kind of like keeping in touch kind of conversations about like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled? How long do you think you're going to be here? What are your career plans? I hear so many horror stories about people who share their ambitions and get shunned. Or if you apply for a job and don't get it, you then miss out on opportunities internally. How dare you be ambitious? And I
Yeah,
think we need to look at talent management differently across the sector as well.
yeah. What do you mean? Like in what way?
Like, like I heard this brilliant anecdote about, I think it's Harrow. All the schools in Harrow have got a pledge that they will not block anyone leaving their schools because it happens. Like heads will ring other heads and say, "Please don't give my physics teacher a job. I haven't got anyone else who can teach A-level physics in our school." Someone doesn't get a job, thinks it's because of them, but actually the heads have made agreement behind the scenes. It happens in trust quite a lot. So these heads in Harrow made a pledge, I believe, that they would let any educator move schools in Harrow because they're staying in Harrow and they're still serving the same community. And I think when people get grief about leaving schools in lurch and get emotionally blackmailed into our kids really need you, my reframe always is the whole system needs you. There's kids in every school in every town who need you.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
worst thing that can happen is for you to leave the system. And I think we need to think differently about the recruitment, the retention, the attrition of educators and teachers, because actually schools are so different. It's about people finding the right school and a school where they can add value, but the school where they can feel that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't be like literally losing as many teachers every year from the system if we treated them differently as a professional body.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the retention problem is an issue in itself, isn't it? But like, kind of, I think what sometimes people misunderstand or aren't fully aware of what diversity actually brings to leadership team. And I think what people don't understand is when you have a select kind of person in senior leadership, and you don't kind of make it diverse, what you end up having is a very narrow perspective. And what diversity absolutely brings to the table is a whole view of the picture, you know, and that sometimes I think is what's missing in schools and leadership teams. Like, would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, absolutely. So, through Women Ed, I got involved with Lean In, and through Lean In, I went to the Lean In conference, and then I got involved with I'm Remarkable, and I'm Remarkable's part of the Google D&I initiative. And through both for those different networks, I get sent an early publication of like the McKinsey report every year. So the Women in the Workplace report every autumn, but also all of the slide decks have got the lit review and the kind of the data underneath them. And doing the research shows that when you have a more diverse workforce, you have more creativity, more innovation, more flexibility, you're more agile, you're quicker able to adjust to marketplace changes. And I really hope that we get some brilliant case studies from this last 12 months difficult period, because I think some of the organisations that have flourished and thrived are the organisations that are diverse, because there's more diversity of perspective and thinking, and that agility is there. Whereas the groupthink organisations, where perhaps it's a bit more monocultural, monogender, are perhaps the organisations that have struggled because they haven't been able to think outside of the box. So I feel like there's some interesting case studies emerging. And then if you think about a macro scale, if we think about the countries that have flourished and thrived, dare I say it, they've all got female heads of state. And if we think about sort of like political leadership and like nation leadership, we need a different type of leadership in the world right now. And it's embarrassing looking at the state of the US and the state of the UK. What have those two leaders got in common? And I think actually the world needs a different type of leadership right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's the lack of diversity in leadership in some respects, isn't it? And you're right. I think it's about kind of making people feel included, and that's kind of where this breakdown is in some respects, because yeah, I mean, it's just kind of not feeling included, is it? I mean, it's kind of us against you all the time, and it shouldn't be like that. I mean, I've always been raised to take people like on face value, regardless of where they're from or what they believe in or whatever. I mean, we're allowed to have disagreements, but ultimately, like that's how you challenge each other and that's how you grow, And
Mm,
it's about kind of
mm.
being respectful to one another, regardless of what their views are.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And like I've talked to a few friends recently about the fact that in lockdown one, there was this wave of kindness and compassion and community values, and then lockdown two kind of changed a little bit. Lockdown three, I feel like there's a lot of selfishness kind of like kicking in at the moment, and it might just be survival mode, and that people are kind of like almost like putting their boundaries around them because people like lots of people are struggling. But what I hear a lot from different people in my network around their treatment as someone with a protected characteristic, particularly when it's visible, is they get pity and they get sympathy, and they get diminished. And actually, what they want is equality and respect and kind of like to be seen and to be heard for the value they bring. And I feel like we've still got a long way to go with what we truly mean about having a diverse workforce, an inclusive culture, about what equity means within education, beyond education. And I really think we're lacking a kind of a vision from the Department for Education when it comes to D&I in particular about what the school and education system could and should look like. And ultimately, when I do speak to people who have got blockers in their school or in their trust about the work we do, I say, like, it needs to be about the child, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
it needs to be about every child in our classroom, every child in our school should have a sense of belonging. And then
Mm.
the next layer of that is every adult in our school, staff body, community needs to have a sense of belonging. Surely that's what we all sign up for. Surely that's why we all become educators in the first place. And if you can't say that you think belonging is important, what the hell are you doing working in the education system anyway? And I think it's that. I think it's building in the time for reflection and discussion and holding the mirror up to ourselves, because we all inadvertently exclude someone. And I think, and that's why I think inclusive allyship is important, because we've all got those blind spots, we've all got a certain element of privilege, and it's about how we can check ourselves, I guess, on who's not at the table, whose voice isn't being heard, who's not represented in the curriculum, etc.
Yeah, I mean, like, so what do we do though? Like, do we kind of hold schools accountable, school at a time? Do we need to kind of hit the DFE up? I mean, what's the answer?
Oh God, that's the golden ticket question, TJ, because there's so many things that need to happen, and and it needs to be like I'm really big on it, things being coherent and cohesive, because things feel so fragmented, and there's so many things happening, but it's making sure that the intentions become actions, and it's not just lip service.
Mm.
And there is a bit of a silence from above about what their intention and what their commitment is. And I think back in the end of the summer, early autumn, there was a lot of very loud activity, very loud commitment, and it's all gone a bit quiet at the moment, and that's alarming. So I've had a couple of meetings today already, like trying to keep the pressure on, trying to keep the conversations going, trying to keep amplifying and modelling how we need to work collaboratively to actually problem solve some of these situations. We've got a long way to go, and I think the journey's only just starting, really.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, can I just ask you, because I think like kind of not where I sit on the fence, but kind of what I don't completely like understand what the right thing to do is. If a school has um, all of their students that are from a white ethnicity background, I mean, do you still need diversity in the senior leadership team?
I would say yes, because are those 1,000 children going to go and work in an organisation where everyone is white? Are they going to go and live in a world where everyone is white? For me, like a school is a microcosm for society, for the world at large. And we need to embody and expose our young people to all the different people from all the walks of life they're going to meet. I know it's harder. So I hear quite a lot from chairs of governors or head teachers who are working in very provincial areas, serving predominantly white communities. And it is harder, but it's not doable.
Yeah.
If I give an example, like when I moved from South London to work in South Oxfordshire, because I had a diverse network, I recruited a disproportionately diverse staff. I had a very diverse governing body, a very diverse SLT, like more so than any I'd worked on in London. So we were almost like overrepresented, but it was so powerful. And because we had a diverse leadership team and governing body, we then in like I'm sure this is like because it was so visible, we then ended up with the highest ratio of diverse young people in the town at our school.
Mm.
So our primary school was, sorry, our secondary school was diverse, but our primary school, I think in our year 1, 2 class, we only had 2 white kids out of 30. And families would say to me, "We've sent our kids here, Hannah, because we know you're going to look after them. We know they're going to have a sense of belonging. You celebrate all the different religious festivals." And there was a real commitment and a feeling of safety, I think, from the families. So, like, you might have an all white school now, but you're not always going to have an all white school. But you're not going to get diverse children coming to your school if you haven't got diverse staff. Like for me, it's about just really thinking about the purpose of your school and the experience your young people are having.
Yeah, it's true. And I think you're absolutely bang on. And I think what the work you're doing is absolutely amazing. I mean, what's next? I mean, like how, like kind of what are your plans for the next few years or like kind of what do you expect to incorporate into the education system, like to make these like sort of these ambitions a reality?
It's a great question. Like I feel like my feet have not hit the ground since May when I started working independently. And I'm a real planner, but what is the point of having any plan at the moment? Like all my plans have gone up in the air in the last 9 months. I'm kind of learning to live in a more organic, spontaneous state at the moment.
Mm.
So we have got plans. Like just if I talk you through this term, like this afternoon we've got our next diverse governance webcast. So that's the third in 6. So that conversation's ongoing. On Saturday, we've got our quarterly Diverse Educators event. So we do an event every quarter. They're clearly all virtual at the moment. And I'm hoping that by the summer we might have a face-to-face event, but who knows? Angie Brown and I are working on our diversity, equity, and inclusion leadership program, and we've got 7 cohorts going through that at the moment, and that is scaling up quite quickly. We've got cohorts booked in for next September already. So for me, it's not necessarily about doing more or doing differently. It's about scaling up what we're already doing and thinking about our sphere of influence. And one of the things I'm involved in is we have a quarterly diversity roundtable, and about 100 stakeholders, organisations come together to talk about how we can work together. And that's an interesting conversation about the kind of the system strategy and how we want to get the DfE along to those meetings to actually work with the people doing the work in the system already. So I think from a from a diverse educator's point of view, it's about being there as a resource to the system. And Benny's curating our diversity in the curriculum Google Drive. And then for me, it's about being there as a support, as a critical friend, and helping to plug some of the gaps, really. And I've got the capacity that if schools need particular things, I can find people to create them and then take them back to the school
Yeah.
system. And one of the things we're talking about, a group of different people, is the kind of the inclusive allyship piece, that a lot of people want to know how to be an inclusive ally but don't know where to start. So I think that might be a piece of work we develop over time as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point actually, because if you have got a senior leadership team that is that is sort of very limited in terms of diversity. I mean, where do you start? I mean, do you get rid of people and actually bring fresh faces in? I mean, like, what do you do?
Well, that's an interesting. We get that quite a lot from governors and from SLT. It's like there's no rule anywhere about how many governors you have in a governing body and how many SLT you have in your SLT. Okay, if like you can create associate roles, sabbaticals, secondments. So there's ways to do it without pushing people out, and it's always a natural turnover in these spaces anyway. So for me, it's about thinking about how you can create those shadow opportunities. I do think not enough people are aware of the glass ceiling in the system, but more importantly, the concrete ceiling in the system. And looking at the data, looking at the exit data from your school or from your trust, and who is leaving and how frequently and at what level are they leaving. I don't think we look at the story the data's telling us,
Mm.
because if we look at sort of like who leaves early career teaching in their first 3 years, if you drill down that data, it's quite stark. Okay, if you then look at kind of the 5 year period, it becomes more female heavy. I know anecdotally from a lot of BAME teachers in my network, like they kind of get stuck at middle leadership. They try to get onto SLT. That's where the concrete ceiling is. And like, how many applications do you do to become assistant head until you just give up and you go and do something else?
Yeah.
So I think we need to look at where the blocks are, where the leaky pipeline is, where the blocks are, and how we can remove those obstacles and those barriers to actually enable more flow up the pipeline as well.
Yeah, I can agree more. I mean, I spoke to a head teacher that's from an ethnic minority background in London actually, and he says that he's applied for a couple of roles for headship inside inner London, and he doesn't even get shortlisted. And he's like, "What's the point of me doing an MPQH if I'm not even going to get looked at? Like, I mean, at least if like shortlist me, give me an interview, and if like I don't get it, then fair enough. But you're not even giving me an opportunity, you know."
I
And
know.
so, I mean, like we need to change that stereotype because he found it really disheartening to the point where he might not even continue in education anymore, you know, and we need
Mm,
to stop that. We need to stop people leaving the education system because they
mm.
don't feel included. So I think that you go,
I was going to say, I'd add to that that my key message would be, and I know I'm a white person saying this, I'm not knocking back his experience, but for me, it's about networking and who you're networking with. And when I was seeking headship, I networked with a lot of chairs of governors and a lot of CEOs. And when I moved to Oxford to be a head, I really reached out to a lot of people. And I think people are quite shy about networking on LinkedIn in education. I don't know why. Like, I would say to anyone listening, if you think about your next role, think about what role you might want and where you might want it to be, and go onto LinkedIn and find all of those heads of department or deputy heads or head teachers, chairs of governors, and send them a LinkedIn request. All they can do is say no. It doesn't matter if they say no, but you're then sort of like on their radar. And when you're sharing content or they're sharing adverts, and lots of people now aren't using some of the bigger publications. They're recruiting in a different way. I did pop up events, like I literally did open events on a Saturday, got a couple hundred people there, and then I'd speak to them all, present to them all, and then I'd get probably like half of them converting into an application, but they already knew me, they already knew my team, they already knew the school. So I think it's that due diligence piece, but also the diversification of your network. And if you are a white chair governor or a white head teacher and you want to diversify your staff body, go and network in diverse spaces. Go to BAME diverse ed, LGBT ed. Go and listen and learn. Follow people. Like, don't be scared to actually pop your little bubble and meet different people.
course. I mean, for some of these people though, it's quite disheartening you have to kind of go to these extreme measures to just to try to get recognised when certain people might just get shortlisted just because they come from a similar background as the people that are looking at them. You know?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
so I mean, like what would like I mean, what do we do there? Like I mean, do we kind of, I mean, do they report them if they aren't satisfied with the results? I mean, do they kind of go to the DFE? Because I don't know how responsive the DFE are in this kind of stuff. So, I mean, what's the answer if they're not getting the results that they feel like they deserve?
So I do know a number of BAME leaders who have involved their unions, have put in grievances, have whistleblown on, and women as well, actually, like women being asked really inappropriate questions about maternity plans and marriage plans and stuff at interview, assumptions about their personal trajectory. I think we do need to whistleblow. We do need to report it on. We also need to like share anecdotally, don't we, with our networks to actually forewarn other people of those situations as well. Like, I always find it quite interesting that like I have a lot of people who contact me pre-application or pre-interview to say, do you know anything about this school, this trust, or do you know someone who I can speak to? Because like people do that informal checks. But I have a lot of people who then get the job and say to me, oh, Hannah, I've got a job with, and what do you think about that trust, or do you know that CEO? I was like, well, you've already accepted the job. I'm not going to say anything, am I? Like, what's the point of me saying anything now? So I think for me, it's about how you can seek support from your network and how you can challenge some of the malpractice, um, and otherwise I don't know. For me, it's how you can get the support from the network. So I know BayMed have got loads of resources on their website supporting people of colour in navigating things like this. LGBT Ed have got their new book out. Women Ed have got their new book out. So I think it's also sort of like finding your tribe is a phrase that some people don't like, but like finding the people who perhaps have the empathy of your situation and can help share things that worked for them.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're early in your career, find those informal mentors and coaches of people who are a little bit more established than you and can sponsor you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that always the worry will be though is if they go down these routes, I mean, will they be kind of blacklisted or kind of, like, I mean, will they be kind of shunned in some respect for being outspoken? Because I think one big problem in sort of education in the UK is that you can't really speak your mind at times, like you kind of feel so restricted. And if you kind of speak out, you're going to be penalized for it in some respect.
There's no such thing as a blacklist in education. And what I always say to people is just remember that we've got a massive recruitment and retention crisis. There are more jobs than teachers. So you choose where you work and make sure it's the right cultural fit and make sure your needs are being met. So I think that's the first reminder. Because I think
Not for headship though. There isn't a massive shortage for headship or like senior leader posts. I mean, everybody wants them, right? If you're a teacher, you can't. That's what you want to aspire to usually. Not
no,
everyone.
there's a
Not
massive shortage for headships, massive shortage.
everyone.
And in London in particular, that someone published something recently about they've calculated how many heads in London are going to retire in the next 5 years. And like there's definitely some massive gaps coming. And if you think about what's happened in the system in the last year, I think we're going to have a flurry of resignations and early retirements of people who are just going to throw the towel in because it's been such a tough year. I'd say be careful about going public and being too explicit. Like, do you mean just think about what needs to be shared? Don't name people, don't name organisations. Clearly, speak to people behind the scenes, but you don't want to tarnish yourself. But I'd also say, going back to you and your own core values and the space that you're going to thrive, you wouldn't want to work in a place like that anyway. And if they are putting you on a air marks kind of like blacklist and other people are listening to that, you wouldn't want to work there anyway. So I think it's finding the schools, the organisations that get it. And I think like doing your due diligence on websites of schools and trust to see what their EDI pledge is. Look at their policies and practices. I think it's like this is what LinkedIn is great for. Like I literally any job I apply for, I go onto LinkedIn, I see anyone listed for that organization, I link in with them, I look at like okay, who are the senior leaders? What's the diversity of this group? How long have they been working there for? Are they all moving on quite quickly? Like I think you can actually get quite a good feel for an organization's culture by looking at who works there through a LinkedIn lens as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, if we kind of focus too much on that, then we'll never get diversity, right? So, I mean, that's the whole thing we're trying to change. So, I mean, it can work both ways in some respects, isn't it? I mean, there's no real right answer, but ultimately, I think the answer is we've got to collaborate and actually work on this together and actually educate people or kind of make these subconscious decisions more like make them more consciously aware that they're doing it, you know? So, I think the work you're doing is so crucial and so important. So, I mean, well done for doing it, firstly, and just I hope it continues and you keep continuing to make changes because I think we need it right now. I mean, the IOE stats that came out, I mean, it just shows the lack of diversity in education. And with us being such a multicultural country, I mean, ultimately, we need to make it more inclusive for people and make them feel like they belong because what we don't want to kind of portray is that if you're not from a certain background that you don't fit in and nobody wants to feel like that, you know. A lot of people are migrants and they've come over and they've brought their kids over because they're ambitious, they want to give them a better life. So what we're saying is, well, you've come all this way and effectively you, because of where you've come from, you're not going to actually fit in, and it's wrong, isn't it? So we need to change that perception. But I mean, is there anything you kind of want to add to that?
No, I totally agree. And I think we need to stand together and we need to keep the focus on it and we need to keep the momentum going because there's so many um, sort of like different priorities that schools are being torn between, and there's so much pressure on head teachers and school leaders. It's making sure that we're keeping a focus on this alongside the other things. And going back to the other things I care about, like not thinking about like mental health and well-being as one aspect and diversity and inclusion as another, because the intersect between those two things is really really key as well. So don't see it as a bolt on, integrate it into everything you do. If every policy and practice had diversity, equity, inclusion embedded in it, we wouldn't be in this mess already.
Mm, absolutely. I mean, look, Hannah, we'll leave it there. I mean, you've obviously given so much advice, and it's great to hear your perspective. And it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to get you on because I think the work you're doing is genuinely wonderful, and I think we kind of really need to incorporate that into the systems in the UK. I mean, there's room for a lot of improvement. I don't buy anything that education is at its peak. In fact, I probably think we maybe were at peak maybe 50 years ago, but the world has changed so much. So it's about time we start kind of moving with the 21st century. You know, like the world is so small now, we can Zoom call each other from all over the world. I mean, I've had Zoom meetings with and people on my podcast that are from like China, Japan. You know, like, I mean, it's about kind of becoming inclusive and actually just working together. I mean, it's far too long we've been an individualistic culture and actually only like worried about what we're doing. And I think we kind of need to look out for the communities and actually become a collectivist culture in some respects, you know. But yeah, amazing. Thank you for coming on, and everyone that's watching, thank you for watching.
Thank you, TJ, for having me. Appreciate it.
I mean, the pleasure was all mine. Thanks, everyone.